Well, on Friday, another alleged Cape gang leader was killed. His car was showered with bullets in Boksburg in Gauteng. Ernie Lastig Solomon's daughter, her baby and another person were wounded in that attack. As Aisha Ismail reports, residents of Houston, where Solomon lived, say their fishing village is in danger of becoming a battleground for power.
Well known in the Western Cape for allegedly being one of South Africa's biggest abalone smugglers, somebody wanted Ernie Solomon out of the way. In May, Solomon and his son were shot and injured outside one of his businesses here in Houston. A third person with them was killed. And while he managed to survive this attack with 5 gunshot wounds, on Friday he was brazenly killed in broad daylight while driving in Boksburg. Ernie Solomon was a man with many personas: gang boss, abalone king, peacemaker, Khoisan leader, and even filmmaker. But residents of the Houston seaside village did not want to speak when we visited the area to find out more about his murder. One resident mumbled something about a family feud and a battle for turf and power. And finally one broke her silence and spoke to us off camera. She described Solomon as the man in charge of the village, saying he had a heart of gold. She nearly broke down when she said Solomon financially supported those in need, often handed out food and hired a bus to take the village pensioners to the V&A waterfront. When asked where Solomons lived, the locals said he had more than a dozen properties, but that his family had left en masse to Johannesburg to identify his body.
It was the 20th of November 2020 when the South African Police Service along with Netcare 911 were called to respond to a shooting which had just occurred at the intersection of Rondeboult Road and Kingfisher Avenue in Boksburg, Johannesburg. At around 8 in the morning, security officers Ewan Brewers and his colleague Vogan Kepke, the first responders to the scene, were having breakfast at that time when they heard the squealing sound of tires. When they looked down the road, they saw a white Ford Ranger Bakkie crashing into a white BMW. The Bakkie would then make a sudden stop in front of the BMW. The driver of the Bakkie, wearing a black cap and a surgical mask, got out carrying a rifle and began to open fire towards the BMW. Not even 10 seconds would pass before a silver Ford EcoSport pulled up next to the BMW. A man carrying a handgun got out and also opened fire on the BMW. The gunman who was using the Ford Bakkie would leave it behind and got into the EcoSport before both hitmen fled the scene. While the gunmen were fleeing the scene, the 2 security officers hurriedly put on their bulletproof vests and made their way towards the BMW.
Police were called at the scene after the incident happened, where we understand there are 4 people who were driving in the BMW. They were shot, one died, and the other 3 were taken to hospital. So far we don't know the motive, and then we are searching for about 4 suspects who drove off with the charcoal Ford.
In the front passenger seat of the car sat a man who was covered in blood and was holding a 1-year-old child in his arms. When the 2 security officers opened the front passenger door, the man covered in blood fell from the car onto the ground, softly asking them to help the child, who had been shot 2 times in the stomach and also in the arm. The child was quickly rushed to the hospital, and she survived. The man, however, would die of his gunshot wounds upon arriving at the hospital. He was shot over 20 times trying to shield the child from gunfire. In the back seat of the BMW was the daughter of Ernie Lastig Solomon, the mother of the 1-year-old child. She was shot over 4 times, including both her legs, but she was airlifted to the hospital, and she survived. Trapped by a seatbelt in the driver's seat of the car, they found the lifeless body of 62-year-old Ernie Lastig Solomon. He was shot over 30 times, in the head, neck and stomach, and died instantly at the scene. Ernie Lastig Solomon was a notorious gang leader from Cape Town.
The gangs in South Africa is the 26th, is the 27th, is the 28th. You understand? They come out of prison, they kill each other because of this number, because of the stories of this number. Look at the graveyards. All the graveyards is full of youngsters because of this numbers. I'm not telling my own friends where I'm gonna sleep tonight. You understand? That's why I'm still alive. Now I must try to make it right for my people or for my next generations before I'm not in this world anymore. Sometimes the father kill his own son, or the son kill his father, and there's a lot of children who grow up without fathers, because of this number we believe in.
This wasn't the first assassination attack on Ernie Solomon's life that year alone. On the 11th of May 2020, 6 months before he died, Solomon, along with his son Carlo and Jonathan Blicky Thomas, allegedly Solomon's right-hand man, were shot at multiple times with a machine gun. They were standing near Club Octopus in Houston, a small town on the Western Cape coast. While Solomon, who was believed to be the target of the assassination attempt, and his son were only wounded, Thomas, his right-hand man, was killed. This was the reason why Solomon decided to leave his hometown of Houston to move to Johannesburg, where he was killed 6 months later. Solomon was alleged to be the leader of the Terrible Joesters, a street-based drug-dealing gang that is believed to control Houston. It is said that the gang numbered 10,000 members and also controlled territory in Delft, Mitchell's Plain, Westbank and Elsie's River in the city of Cape Town, as well as in other towns across the Western Cape. According to locals, apparently Solomon took over Houston between 2003 and 2005 by imposing his power and using violence in a way that is still rumored to haunt the shore.
This is not friends for you. The last time we was talking, he tell me it's difficult because if you sign your name by this gang, you must stay till your day of death.
Despite being 100 kilometers from Cape Town, Houston is a little community that is nonetheless a part of the city's criminal underworld. Since the town's founding at the beginning of the 19th century, many Houston families have resided there, primarily relying on small-scale fishing for their livelihoods, until the industry started to collapse in the 1990s. Since then, because to his pivotal position in the illegal abalone trade, on which its economy is now somewhat dependent, Houston has become more and more entangled in Cape Town's larger drug market. Abalone, a giant snail considered as a gourmet food in China, is native to the South African coast, and may be taken by divers using simple scuba equipment. However, doing so is extremely dangerous. It has been frequently abused and illegally sold by Cape Town's gangs to Chinese organized crime groups since the early 90s.
I think 100%, 80% yalapha isebenza ngalomsebenzi because of imisebenzi ayikho. Eyoba sewuqhekeza ezindlini zabo sabona le iyona solution.
In most instances, Chinese crime groups have typically exchanged chemicals which can be used to make drugs for the seafood, mainly a substance called ephedrine, which is used to manufacture mandrake sleeping pills, a popular drug in the Western Cape in the 1980s, and still in use. More recently, ephedrine is used to make another popular drug called crystal methamphetamine or TIC, which is heavily abused in the Western Cape.
It makes you feel high and the unga makes you feel down. But as the unga geroken dat voelt ze weer soos 'n normal mens leef. Your life is coming back. As weer terug na lewe toe kom, maar as jy nie het nie dan voel jy van niks doen nie. Jy voel
Through their hold over Houston and the surrounding coast, through their affiliation to the 28s, the Terrible Joesters therefore enjoy an advantageous position as a gang. They control both the territory from which they can harvest abalone, to exchange for drug precursor chemicals, which also allows them to sell drugs to other gangs, as well as other neighborhoods in which to sell the drugs on a retail basis. Residents of Houston claim that major figures from rival gangs regularly visit the town to collect large quantities of drugs. Solomon's allegedly powerful position may have been the reason he was murdered in November 2020. Soon after his death, several theories would circulating in gang networks and also around media about the logic behind the assassination. They blamed outsiders, or rival gangs, arguing that the hit was a retaliation for Solomon's alleged involvement in other attacks. However, the most frequently heard explanation is that there was a family feud within the Terrible Joesters gang. It is said that tensions between Solomon and his nephew Horatio led to the death of 2 family members, including Horatio's daughter, and other alleged gang members who worked for them. In the hierarchy of the Terrible Joesters, Horatio is claimed to be one of 3 senior figures directly beneath Solomon. It is said that the infighting between Solomon and Horatio led to a split in the gang, with new alliances being formed with various gangs, linked to the 28s gang. Horatio and a group of his men were recently sentenced to life in prison, after being found guilty of murder and various other charges in the Western Cape High Court. But investigators say what happened in the background was the cause of the deadly feud. During the explosive trial, which was heard by Judge Owen Rogers, 2 former gang members turned state witness to turn on the terrible Joesters gang, and fingered them for a string of high-profile gang hits. Horatio and 11 other men appeared in court to face more than 70 charges, which included murder, drug dealing and gun charges. It is said that the split between Solomon and his nephew Horatio started during the trial, as Solomon was said to be upset that he had been implicated by former gang members under Horatio's command. It is said that there was power and money struggles between Solomon and Horatio. Apparently Solomon spent millions on the defense lawyers for Horatio and his men, and that he demanded Horatio to pay him back, but Horatio refused. Solomon allegedly told him he must pay up or hand over his properties, but Horatio refused and made alliances with other 28 gangs. On the 15th of March 2020, while he was out on bail, Horatio and his 13-year-old daughter, Saskia, came under fire at his Durbanville home, as unknown men opened fire on him. It is alleged that the hit was sent by Solomon to take him out in that shooting, however it was Horatio's daughter who died. 2 months later, Solomon and his son Carlo were wounded in a shooting in Houston, while their bodyguard was killed. This apparently was a suspected retaliation hit for the death of Horatio's daughter. Solomon would then flee to Johannesburg, where he was killed 6 months later, on the 20th of November 2020.